Hello, Impact Makers. I'm Virginia Cincromani, a sustainability trainer, coach, and author. Welcome to The Good Communicator. You're probably wondering, what's The Good Communicator? It's your go-to podcast built exactly for you, the sustainability professional, to help you turn sustainability from a hurdle to triumph. Here, we break down the art of effective communication to make sustainability irresistible and co-create new futures. Come on a journey with me as we dig into proven frameworks and actionable strategies and demystify the process of influencing others in every episode. From building trust and using empathy in communication to overcoming resistance and inspiring action, we craft, we inspire, we co-create the perfect message that doesn't just remain in the head, but moves hearts towards sustainable change. Good morning, Beatrice. How are you doing?
Hi, Virginia. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, and thank you so much for agreeing to participate to the Good Communicator podcast. I'm really delighted to have you along, also because you are, I think, a voice that is a little bit different from the people that I've interviewed so far, because you don't, strictly speaking, work in sustainability or with sustainability people, or at least not exclusively. You come from the construction industry, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And thank you for having me here. So yes, indeed, I am a personal branding and impactful positioning expert for the construction sector. So that's my core sort of niche. For people that are not familiar with personal branding, because I'm sure we'll talk more in more detail about how, explaining what one does in a powerful way is important. But basically what I do is I help professionals, business owners, senior leaders basically craft their professional identity and communicating it in a way that really resonates with their target audience in terms of their value, their message. And I help them articulate that in a way that is effective, because that's what's going to make them stand out, have greater influence, visibility, but ultimately success. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Wonderful, thank you. Also, like me, I think you are an architect originally, correct?
Correct. I trained as an architect a long time ago now, but yes.
I know, right? Every time I think about my architectural background, it's like ages ago. And you're also Italian, like me, so
I am.
living in the UK. So we've been put in touch by someone that we both know and work with. And the reason why I was quite excited to interview you is because, like I mentioned before, you work with construction and the construction industry. Obviously, you come from construction like myself, like I said before, which it is a traditional industry, isn't it? And something like branding or even personal branding, I'm sure, is quite a challenge, A, to explain and understand, and B, to actually implement because of the way actually the industry has been evolving in this country, but also in other countries. So tell me a bit more about that, and what are probably your challenges in terms of communicating what you do to start with, I suppose, but also making people understand the importance of communication and communicating one's branding in their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on such a key point here, because definitely when I start chatting to people, I have to take them on a journey. So you've seen how it comes automatic for me to say I do personal branding and this is what it is. Because I've had people ask me if I design logos, because they confuse personal branding with traditional branding as we know it. Because personal branding, basically, it's been around for many years, decades, but originally it was a concept that was very much related to career progression. So you need to find a new job, you need to work on your personal brand. But in more recent years, it's become, not just a nice to have, it's become something that any entrepreneur, any business owner needs to have. You need to cultivate your personal brand, because we have all of these tools available to us. We all have an online presence, whether we like it or not. We're all online in some shape or form. So cultivating that is a must. It's no longer a nice to have, something that you do when you change your career. And it's definitely fairly new in the construction sector still, this whole idea of shaping one's presence as an expert, as a leader. And it definitely comes from the fact that there's also so much noise online, so much noise. And, marketing was something that big businesses used to do, small business not so much. With social media, everyone is doing marketing. So how do you stand out? And personal branding is the answer to that. But as we've said, it is a new idea in our sector still, and we're not the biggest risk takers in construction, right? We're always, lagging behind a little bit. So I've had to work massively on my own communication skills, because understanding where my audience was in that journey and making sure that I was communicating with them in a way that they would understand, and that would show them the value of personal branding, was incredibly important. But equally, the other point that you've touched on is construction. In construction, we often deal with very complex matters. Sustainability is one of them, for sure. ESG, anyone in engineering, in prop tech, you name it, regulations. There are some very, very complex topics that we talk about, and that are part of people's personal brands. To showcase their expertise, they need to talk about these complex topics. And it's incredibly important that they take into account, well, where is my audience in this journey? Are they as savvy as I am about the technicalities? Can I use the jargon? Do I need to, like I did, take them on a bit of a journey? Because, often it's very easy to focus so much on showcasing your expertise that you're like, I'm going to use all the big and complex words because, that's what an expert does. But you're not thinking about who's on the other side. And, are they following me? Have I lost them? So that's why this is so important.
Absolutely. In fact, as an architect, or former architect, I would say, I've noticed how we give for granted, in general, people in the industry, engineers, architects, property managers, etc., give for granted certain concepts. So, for example, or certain ideas that we're so familiar with because we studied them back at university, we practice them every day. And it's very hard for people to even simplify, like you said, not using jargon with clients, for example, that might not have that knowledge at all. And also to apply that to their own image. So making sure that they always come across as approachable and they don't use jargon, etc. So I'm sure your clients do go on a journey, a personal journey, probably of self-discovery in that sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the starting point of any work that I do with anyone, from sort of CEOs all the way to small business owners, which is also my favorite bit, is that initial discovery piece where we sit down and we go like, right, who is your audience? And people normally have some sort of answer. But then I'm like, right, let's go a level deeper, and then a level deeper, and then a level deeper, because this is not about job titles. This is about really understanding these people as humans without trying to sound cheesy, but like, what's important to them? What do they want to hear about? What's their level of understanding? Of course, but it's about really taking the time to get underneath their skin a little bit and make sure that you know exactly who you're talking to. And that piece is my favorite because there is always a light bulb moment, from people that have just started their business, so they haven't been doing it for a long time, all the way to people that have been in the industry for 20 years when they go, oh, yes, I never thought about that. That's amazing because, going to that level of understanding, that's what really allows them to connect with their audience, to get across to them, to get their message across to them, to get the positioning that they want, because it's all about communication. You're no longer talking at them, you're talking with them because you're speaking the same language, So it is very much a journey and a discovery one. And yeah, I think it's great. It's one of the best moments.
And I love what you're saying because, of course, like we said, you're working with construction people, which may or might not working with sustainability. I mean, hopefully everybody does these days, but we know that that's probably, unfortunately, not the reality. But actually, whatever the listeners of this podcast, whichever industry they work in, they can do the same exercise. They can sit down with themselves in some cases and think, okay, who is my audience? What do they want from me? What do they want in general? What do they want to achieve? And then do they understand me? And that piece is really important, besides being obviously quite exciting. But I suppose as well, through my work, I also discovered that that's not just for marketing purposes. It's also actually providing better results, better outcomes in the projects you work in, because simply you communicate better with the people that you work with. Is that also your...
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you're right in saying that this applies to any industry. So my core is construction, but I do work with other sectors as well on the side. And the baseline is always the same. The approach is always the same, and it's equally as important. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes the work that I do with clients, especially this initial piece, ends up informing the business strategy or even the products and the services that they are selling, because it's like, oh, hang on, actually my audience really cares about this and they're really struggling with that. Can I actually change my offering slightly to help with that as well? I thought that this is what they wanted. Turns out it's not. They don't care. Absolutely. So that's absolutely right. And there's lots of templates that you can find online. I have some free templates on my website, that even just having a few questions that you're asking yourself and then going a level deeper. But why? But why? And then but why? The 5 or 10 whys exercise is already a great starting point, because you're starting to shift your mindset slightly, and you're no longer looking at you, but you're looking at them. And then that's a process that you can't really reverse. Once you start getting into that way of thinking, then it only gets more and more evident whether your offering, your communication is actually, matching your audience.
I think this is so on point as well. If I bring it back to the sector that I work in, the sustainability sector in general, because I think communication is one of the major failure of the sector, and one of the reasons why the world is in these conditions. Because if we were to offer what people really needed, what people really wanted, and combine these two and do it in a way that is a co-creation exercise as opposed to something that we think or impose on other people, then I think it could be less products, higher quality products, probably longer business relationships between people, because we are providing the service that these people need, but also we probably look at other stakeholders around it. We also look at the planet as a silent stakeholder. We look at the communities where these businesses and people live, and all of it sort of start falling into place. It's not like just somebody waking up in the morning. Well, I'm sure nobody does that exactly, but waking up in the morning, oh, I'm going to sell this, or I'm going to build a building there. But there will be more iterations, perhaps, and more discussions and more discoveries that will make whatever products come out, better quality and maybe last longer even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this piece around asking yourself those honest questions, I don't know. I don't think people don't do it because they don't want to. Often it's because they don't have the tools, or they don't realize how disconnected the two things are. And I mean, we all talk so much about social media and what it's done to sort of us and the way we interact with other people. But I think there is something to say about that, because we now have a tool that allows us to communicate globally. We can get a message out there like that. So the whole dynamic has changed. At the same time, it's brought us further away from our audience, because, when you're online, you put a message out there and you can, if you wanted to, you could be not completely authentic. That connection that you have when you're talking face to face, where you're it's a two-way dialogue, because I talk to you and I look at your facial expressions and you give me an answer. That is, make sure that we're always aligning and aligning and aligning, because there's, a question and an answer. On social media, that is obviously very much tamed down. It's still a two-way dialogue, but there's a big filter there. And so that has not helped with that disconnection that I think is often at the basis of understanding really what we're doing, who we're doing it for. Is this needed? And something else I would add is, on one hand, because it's become so easy to share an idea, to share a product, to start a business, because of the whole, all the digital platforms, the process can be so immediate that perhaps we can be quite reactive with that, putting a new offering out, putting a new product out. And we don't necessarily have that lag time where we go, is this something that's needed? How is it going to be received? Are people actually using it, etc.? So all of that time frame has shrunk. And so it probably takes some of the reflection out sometimes.
How do you suggest your clients usually, deal with this disconnection and the social media issues that you just mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, two things. The starting point is always asking yourself the question. So, starting to do these exercises, because especially if you've been in the industry for a long time, you know your clients, you know who these people are, you've had tons of conversations with them. So, that's the starting point. But then it's having more conversations. So speaking to the people that you are trying to reach on calls like this, on, at networking events, test your ideas. When you come to a conclusion, have a chat to them and see what they think, what they feel, what their feedback is. If we all have loads of connections in the industry. If they are potential clients, even better, but we will all have at least one potential client that we have a great relationship with and that we can have the conversation with. So for me, it's always about doing the work, going through the process, coming up with your answers and testing and speaking and getting feedback. And then you go back to the drawing board. And this is something that has to be ongoing, because the world and the market and people shift so quickly these days. But once you have the framework and once you have the right mindset to do that, then it becomes an automatic process. So I think it's very much about using all the great tools that we have and then still having the face-to-face conversation and balancing both.
That's great. I really like what you're saying, and it's so much in line with what I believe really everybody needs to do. And it takes a little bit of eating the humble pie sometimes, because you have to take feedback on board, that you have to listen, which is very hard these days, right? We're all good at speaking, but not necessarily at listening, even on social media. So I think that's definitely some of the skills that need to be refined a little bit in order to get to a better product or better outcome, better project, whatever people are working on. I have a question about your own challenges in communication. So what would you reckon has been so far the biggest challenge, the biggest communication challenge you had? Because you mentioned how you take clients on a journey. I don't know, is that the one or you got something else?
Oh, where do I start? So I would definitely say, the point that we touched on at the beginning is probably the most relevant one. So trying to introduce what I see as a fairly new approach, a fairly new, theme in a sector that is incredibly sometimes resistant to something that's new, and they're simply not aware of it, and there aren't many precedents. So, when I have to bring examples to the table, because that's the best way to show something to somebody, like, look at what they're doing, or look at this communication style. It's that there aren't many examples in constructions compared to other sectors, obviously. So I would say that's been the biggest challenge for me, but it's also taken me on this discovery journey, because it's really forced me to be like, right, who are these people? What do they care about? How do they like to be spoken to? What's the best way for me to explain something to them? Is it to show them something, or is it to use really simple terms? I don't even really use personal branding that much in my communications. So I think it still features in my LinkedIn headline, but it's very much about explaining what I do. So impactful positioning, reaching the clients that you want, spelling it out, as opposed to saying I'm a personal branding expert. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile, it changes all the time because it's a constant, learning curve. But to be honest, the upside is that if you are able to connect with a crowd of people that are solution unaware, potentially problem unaware, and show them something new and actually get through to them, then that's great. It's incredibly rewarding, and it's definitely, forced me to grow as somebody that works in communication for sure. Yeah.
So obviously you use your own tools, which is fantastic. Obviously, putting them in practice yourself. But you said something that is very relevant, I think, is trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try and understand how do they want to be spoken to, what sort of things will resonate with them. Is it case studies, examples, which like you said, you might not have many, or is it simple language or a combination of those, or who knows what else, because again, every person is different. But it's that flexibility that allows you to be obviously a good communicator and get through to your clients. And in fact, on that theme, I send you in advance the DISC personality test, which I use a lot as a sort of rule of thumb. I never obviously can't send it to my clients and say, oh, can you do this before we start our conversations? But it's quite a fun exercise, I find, to try and understand where more or less they sit, whether they are, dominant, influential, steady, or cautious, the four quadrants of the disc, which I always talk about. Which one do you think you are resonating the most with?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I loved that the disc stuff that you sent me. So, as it says on the website as well, we're a mix of all of these, and I think depending on the circumstance, there will be one side that comes out that is stimulated more. I would probably say that I do resonate quite a bit with an I. So I feel that also because of what I do and the path that I've chosen, communicating, persuading people, trying to influence them is very much part of what I do, because otherwise it would be a non-starter. And I like to think that I come across as quite approachable because, I have to make sure that people know that I am open to questions. I'm open to take them on a journey, that they feel that they can be comfortable with them. And because of that initial discovery piece, there's a lot of introspection, a lot of opening up. So I think if I was a cold and stern personality, that would be a bit harder for them. I do think that also maybe the D can be part of me. So I like to think that I'm quite assertive, but also results driven and bigger picture thinking, because something that I think sometimes marketing communication can be a bit guilty of is the fluff, is the whole, sort of messaging with no real tangible stuff behind it. For me, I am very much about results. So in personal branding, which often involves platforms like LinkedIn in our sector, it's an obvious place to start. Yes, impressions, yes, engagement, great. Of course, they are indicators, but are you having the conversations? Are you attracting new clients? Are you landing new projects? That's what we're here for, because otherwise, if we have loads of people looking at our posts and liking them, but nobody wants to talk to us, something's wrong. So it has to be, I always try and be very, very much down to earth and grounded with this kind of stuff.
How that influence your communication style then? Because obviously you said, knowing the industry, I know that lots of people you might come across might be maybe on the cautious side, the blue side, because they might be task driven and also not very sociable. How do you flex your style to approach those people then?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously, I also worked with engineers, for example. So
Yeah.
very, very sort of, data driven and probably, yes, falling in the C category, very analytic. And so something like communication, personal branding, which can be perceived as quite soft, sometimes is hard to sort of communicate. So how do I flex my style? Well, obviously, I think in any form of communication, even if it's my client with their personal brand trying to talk to their audience, um, where is the balance between who you are and how these people like to be spoken to? Because I would never advise that you completely change your communication style and your personality maybe to suit your audience. That's not going to work. It's not going to last. They're going to see through it. It's going to be a disaster. So for me, it's about understanding, well, how can I leverage my strengths or the sides of my personality, my ability to communicate, to make sure that I am resonating with these people. So I don't know, things like me being quite open and chatty and lively. I think sometimes that can help if there's some resistance on the other side, because that sort of balances and maybe makes the other person at ease. If I'm speaking to somebody that is very, data driven, results driven, then I'm going to try and bring that to the forefront a bit more and speak a language that they understand. So my way of communicating is going to be very similar, but I think it's about if you understand what the other person needs and what language they speak, then you can bring to the forefront the elements that are going to make more sense. Because really, it's not people don't want to understand, simply that sometimes they don't, because that's not how they speak, that's not how they see the world. So it's about trying to help them and to take them on that journey.
I absolutely love your point about the fact that you really don't have to change your personality. And it would be, these days it's all about authenticity and about showing yourself as you are, etc. Obviously, with a little bit of editing here and there. Um, but I do believe also in what you're saying about, I can be quite chatty. I am quite chatty. I can be a bit up front, or maybe too much too much in your face, if you like. Maybe it's the Italian me, or maybe it's just the way I am, and that might not sit well with everybody. However, like you said, when you meet somebody that would care about the details as opposed to the fluffiness of certain ideas, then maybe that's what you need to bring to the table, as well as your personality, because you can't change who you are, and actually that makes you unique. And if people chose you, is because of your personality, I believe.
Yeah.
So that compromise is really, really important. It's just striking the balance that I think is difficult for some people. But even exploring the opposite corner of your, if you think at the disc, the opposite corner would be quite interesting, because it makes you think, okay, there are people that actually resonate more with, I don't know, data, tables, analysis, like you said, as opposed to the big vision and, the inspirational things. So that probably could be, a suggestion to the audience. If you find yourself in one corner, try and think what happens to the people on the other side.
Absolutely. And if I can add on to that, I think there's also an element of you might not be everyone's cup of tea. There obviously you have your target audience. Perhaps you want to work with, I don't know, high-end developers, great. But within that space, there will be different types of businesses with different a different ethos, different values, led by different people. They might be further on in their career, they might be younger. It's about finding your crowd as well. So there is that balance, and not trying to shoehorn and make sure that you work for everyone, because ultimately very often people, well, I would say most of the time, people pick somebody because to work with them because they like them, because you're going to have to be in contact with that person. So that plays a massive role. Your business might be the best there, but if you don't click with the person that you're going to work with, it won't work. So I think there's also an element of use all the tools you have with communication and try and find a connection there. But also, you might not be for everyone, and they might not be for you necessarily. So it's about finding your crowd in the space that you want to access.
Which actually, it makes me think about something that I read in a business book a few years ago, about the fact that you don't have to appeal to, like you said, everybody. You don't have, if you are, for example, a business owner, you don't have to have 100,000 people that actually follow you, but you might need the 100 that are really passionate about you. They're supporters and they are champions of what you do. They really resonate with your material, with your personality. And I suppose personal branding helps define that niche and define the sort of people, the crowd that you attract. And I suppose it's not just for business owners, it must be also for companies and bigger organizations.
Absolutely. And I think that what I touched on at the start, everyone has a personal brand, because ultimately your personal brand is the perception that people have of you. And even if you're not a social media person, throughout your career, you will have met 10, hundreds, thousands of people. They will have an idea about you. And they might have worked with you on a specific project. So they might think that that's where your expertise lies. I don't know, Virginia, I worked with her on a residential project. She's a residential architect 10 years ago. I don't know. You've moved on so much. That's not what you do. But if you don't cultivate your personal brand, that's that's the idea that people will have, about you and what you do. So yes, there's this whole point about how does an individual, especially if you are a leader, but also if you're a mid-senior sort of person within the organization, well, how does your personal brand align with the company brand? So that's a very important piece. And the two things need to work together. What they need to have in common is goals. So finding your crowd, understanding what type of people does your business wants to work with, who do you align with. But there also needs to be an alignment on values and the messaging that you're putting out there and the problems that you're trying to solve for these people. So that's incredibly important, that relationship and understanding how that works. I think, unfortunately, often, especially for companies, it's very much a tick box exercise. I need to have my values on my website. Boom, done. I don't know, sustainability, honesty, etc. And it's fine. It might well be that you believe in those values, but not necessarily. I have seen businesses that don't necessarily align with those values. And what I mean with that is, do the people align with those values? Because ultimately, the company is the people, right? And it's the leaders. So that's where personal branding becomes incredibly important, because when the senior leaders find their voice and they have a strong presence online, that's the sort of almost proof of concept. They are representing the business, and they're an incredibly important part of representing the business and the values and the messages. There were some stats that I was reading recently. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but basically the bottom line was companies are way less credible than its individuals, which is an obvious thing, but it was interesting to see the data behind it. So people are way more interested in Bill Gates than they are interested in Microsoft. Microsoft has way less followers than Bill Gates, for example, on LinkedIn. So people are way more invested in individuals. And that plays a massive role in talent attraction, talent retention as well. Businesses where the leaders and the employees are active online have a much lower sort of turnover rate. They attract better talent because it's perceived as more authentic. Most businesses, especially the bigger ones, will have a marketing team. So when we see an article published on their blog, or when we see their values, immediately our thought goes to, oh, this is the corporate team that's behind this. But if I see a director, a senior leader, somebody from the company actually talking about that message, those values, but in their voice, not something that the marketing team has pulled together for them, because people can tell if that's your voice or not, then I'm suddenly way more invested in that business. I believe it a lot more because there's a face behind it. There's a human being with its own voice. And so personal branding plays a key value in really validating those, a key role in validating those values and that message. Massive. The performance of content shared by employees, individuals, senior leaders, as opposed to the same message shared by the company pages. This is obviously on social media. It was something ridiculous. The posts by people performed like 8 times better, something silly. So that just shows how, the power of individuals. If you find, your crowd and the people that are resonating with you, and if you also use your employees to really pull your message forward, that's massively, massively important. and the results are very different. I suppose something that I was thinking about, well, why don't people do that? Because there is an element of exposure. When I work with people, especially the construction people, because of how risk averse we are, there's a bit of obviously fear of putting yourself out there. So your voice is incredibly powerful, but it's basically the cost and benefit analysis that so people are like, oh, this is going to reap great rewards, but I'm going to expose myself to, I don't know, there's all sorts of fear, sometimes rational, sometimes not, that come up. You're obviously, social media can also be a scary place. The online world can be a scary place. The stronger your voice, the more susceptible you are, if you like, to people sharing their opinion about that voice. LinkedIn, for example, I find is a very, very low risk platform. So luckily, there is very little bullying. I touch wood, but I haven't really come across it for my clients in our industry, especially. But there is definitely an element of confidence. What if people don't care about what I say? What if people, don't like it, etc.? What's going to happen when I start speaking up and showing myself online? And that's also something that normally takes people on a long journey as well, on a long personal journey. And I completely understand the discomfort around it, because when I first started being more active online, cultivating my personal brand and sharing on LinkedIn and coming on podcasts like this, it's scary if you've never done it, because you're like, what on earth is going to happen? Often nothing happens, because unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, there is lots of content online. We are spoiled for content. So when we feel that everyone is looking at us, unfortunately, they are not, because otherwise it would be so easy to get our message out there. And, it's like, here I am, this is what I've got to say. Now the whole world knows it. No, that's not. So that often, can reassure people, because it's like, you're not the only one. There's lots of us on there. And the worst case scenario that you think might happen actually is very unlikely to realize. So that's the biggest barrier, to people using their voice. But it's such a powerful tool, especially with messages like, sustainability in our sector. So the first tip won't come as a surprise after all of our conversation today, but is take the time to understand your audience. Even if you think that you know them really, really well, even if you know that you are targeting asset managers in this particular space, etc., go a level deeper. Take the time to do that, because that's going to influence your communication style, but also your understanding of where are they on that buying journey, let's call it. Are they problem aware? Do they know they have a problem? Do they know about the solutions available? Is your solution new, etc.? That's going to change completely the way you talk. And also, understanding their pains, their challenges, all of that. So really getting to understand them. The second tip, which I think we've also touched on, is favor clarity over complexity. Sometimes people ask me like, oh, could you check my LinkedIn headline or this piece of content that I'm going to put out and all of that. The rule of thumb always needs to be, would an 8-year-old understand this? Maybe a 10-year-old if you like, but is this clear enough? Everything else doesn't matter. Is my writing style creative? Is this engaging? Is it clear? Do people understand what you're saying? Because otherwise they're going to disengage, and sometimes they might even get annoyed. It's like, what am I reading? I don't understand. So favoring clarity over complexity. And then I suppose it's also about taking the time to understand your, call it USP, your unicity, what makes you unique, your superpower. But it's not just about understanding your audience, it's also about understanding yourself, your offering, your personal brand. So that's a mixture of the problem that you're solving, because it could be a service, it could be a service that other people offer as well, but that is mixed with your own personality, your style of working, your leadership style, what your company does. So also take the time to understand that, because when you put all of these three things together, then you're very likely to be onto a winner and to cover all the bases about how you communicate with the people that you're speaking to. There are free resources on my website, and one is around understanding your client, so feel free to go and download that. I am also, a public speaker, so I speak at events, If your company is organizing an internal event, or if you'd like me to come and deliver a workshop to your team, I'm also available for that. And I also run some free sessions online as well. If you're interested in any of that, link up with me on LinkedIn, and it's always on there.